On today's show, the Capitals' surprise success last season and which prospects are looking to take a jump forward in 25-26. I'll discuss next on this edition of Locked On Capitals.
Your Locked On Capitals, your daily podcast on the Washington Capitals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Well, hello and welcome into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Dan Holme. I've covered the Capitals for the past 3 seasons for Locked On and various other outlets before that. I'm also the host of the weekly show called The Capitals Minute Cast, available wherever you find your podcasts. And as always, I want to thank you for making this your first listen of the day. Today's episode is brought to you by our friends at Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. So in this edition of Locked On Capitals, we talk about the prospect pool for the Capitals. At one time, it was considered a weakness or not one of the better ones in the NHL. Now they are brimming with possibilities. Who are some of those core prospects? I'll talk about that a bit later. I'll talk about defense and the goaltending pipeline. Marquee names, but the goaltending pipeline, a bit in question. But just to get it going here, talking about the surprise season of the Capitals last season. And I heard it everywhere as someone does a podcast for the show, some of my fellow hosts. I don't know how to tell you, Dan, the Capitals aren't going to be too good. Brian McClellan, former GM, 2 summers ago, made some big changes. Pierre-Luc Dubois is the one that got the ball rolling. We also saw Logan Thompson, Jacob Chikrin, Matt Roy, Mangiapane, Radish. Some of those players were more instrumental in the Capitals' success. Some didn't play as big of a role, but the proof was in the pudding, as the Capitals were the first team to qualify for a playoff spot just the season before. It came down to the wire, and were the last team to qualify. That there is a lot of pressure on this team. But just to kind of look back briefly on last season and how the Capitals did the unthinkable thing. Like I said, if you are not a Capitals fan and you lived outside of DC, many people perceive that the Capitals wouldn't be that good. Some Capitals fans didn't think they were going to be as good as they were. The thought out there was that they were going to be a bubble team, maybe a wild card team if things broke right. Instead, they were hanging around the division lead into March. And of course, we all know that there was a turning point. And what was behind a lot of their success was Alex Ovechkin. Alex Ovechkin chasing down Gretzky to at one point catch and pass. The records, the milestone, every goal felt significant when Ovi was on the ice. Every celebration carried weight. And I said that on this show last season, and I think it still holds true, that I think the Capitals were so fixated on Alex Ovechkin catching and passing Gretzky that the byproduct of that was that the Capitals played really well. That after that they're almost like, well, what are we playing for now? I mean, I knew that they knew what they were playing for, but it put them in an interesting position that when you feed the puck to the greatest goal scorer of all time, well, what do you know? That rises the water and you're up in the rankings. But the thing that's interesting about last season is it would be easy to generalize or characterize the Capitals' success exclusively on Alex Ovechkin. Or you could say it was Carlson or Wilson, one of these kind of marquee names that have been instrumental in the Capitals' success all season. The real story, though, I think, is how many under-the-radar guys stepped up. You take a look at the players that took a step forward, career numbers. I'm talking Connor McMichael. I'm talking Alexei Protas, Pierre-Luc Dubois, and also kind of the secondary and tertiary guys. I'm talking Mangiapane, Radish. Like I said, some roles bigger than others, but regardless of what role they played, that product all put in a pot was the key part of the Capitals' success. What we did see, however, this past summer is a lot of those players, or some, I guess we could say, move on to other teams. some players that the Capitals were hot on for years. Alex Ovechkin, for example. I think the Capitals have better options, and ultimately Alexiev is happy to be playing out with the Penguins. But when you take a look at the team like the Capitals doing great things, you don't normally think that they're doing that well as far as prospects. Generally, their prospect pool is a mess. You've traded away draft picks, you've thinned out the pipeline, but not the Capitals. The Capitals actually have one of the best prospect pools in the NHL. Some people say top 5, top 3. I guess it's a bit debatable. And that's still while they're winning at the NHL level. Now, kind of a juxtapose of what they used to be like is that the Capitals were all in on win now mode. If that meant trading away a key prospect, if that meant trading away a draft pick, they did whatever it took to get a perceived winning product out on the ice. Rarely did it pay dividends. The high water mark was 2018, of course, the Stanley Cup winning year. They did, it wasn't just 2018. I don't want to cut the team short, but the perils of doing that, I think, put the Capitals in a bad position where their prospect pool wasn't as good as it is right now. That there definitely has been a sea change as far as the prospect pool is concerned. And that is why there are a lot of upper echelon marquee prospects within the Capitals. And that's a huge thing because what do we know? Alex Ovechkin, this could be his last season, and a change is coming. And whether he plays another year, 2, 3 years, whatever the case might be, that you need to have your eyes set to the future. Also monitoring what's going on in the present, of course. But the thing of it is you don't want to be kind of in the Pittsburgh Penguins position. Think about the moment that Crosby retires. I think that there is going to be quite a vacuum in Pittsburgh, and they're going to be left reeling. Now, that's a team that's tried to address the situation as well. A little bit too late to do it, but they're trying to do it now. That I think the Capitals made tactful moves that put them in the position that they're in, because I don't think that there's any panic within the Capitals organization. Now, if you are an everydayer of the show, I said in yesterday's or the last podcast that I did is what if the kids aren't ready? I'm kind of trying to give you the point and counterpoint to this team because we don't know. Is Chris Patrick going to go out and make some acquisitions? Are they going to lean into the youth? That could pay off well or it could pay off poorly. But I don't think that there is any true panic within the Capitals organization. If we go into next season as is, would I like some assuredness? For sure. But sometimes life doesn't give you assuredness. It's going in with your best bet, your best players. And I hate to say it because it's not the right tactful thing to do it if you're, hyper vigilant, is to go into next season as an NHL team, crossing your fingers and toes and hoping that it's good enough. But I think the Capitals prospects, we got to put faith into the kids. We really have to do it. It's going to have to come at some point that whether it's next season, a couple seasons from now, that you're ultimately just kicking that can down the road, that we're going to trust him next year. No, not next year, the following year. And what happens is those prospects get older. And sometimes I believe that those prospects kind of get pushed out a little bit further beyond their prime youthful dates, if you know what I mean, that their prime season could be when they're younger. And I think that oftentimes, if you want to take a look at the net minding or the defense, that some of these prospects that you think next year is going to be their year. I'll talk about Alexiev here, for example. It was never his year. It's going to be his year next year. Oh, but they got Joel Edmondson. It's going to be his year. He got injured. But I think that the Capitals need to lean into the youth now. I mean, why not? Because, in the last episode, like I said, a point counterpoint, I talked about Jack Roslovic. But he's not a sure bet either. He saw depreciated numbers. The very fact that he is still on the open market right now speaks volumes of his value. I don't think that we go into next season with him being on the open market, but to bring it back to the Capitals and their prospects, I think that now is the right time. If they go out and make some veteran acquisitions, I'm not going to hate it, but I also don't have a tremendous amount of reluctance if they don't. Now is the time. And that's what I'm going to talk about in this episode is the key pieces, the key players on this team, because the one thing I hear more than anything else is prospects. Tell me about Tarek Parasek. Tell me about Hudson. Tell me about these guys. That there is definitely a hunger to know what's next, because I think Capitals fans know that change is coming, whether it's next season or the following season, that you're slowly starting to see these players integrate. We saw Ryan Leonard. We very well could see Andrew Cristall, Ivan Miroshnichenko, all these guys slowly trickling in as some of the veteran pillars are either aging out, retiring, or trying to explore greener pastures. Whatever the case, change is coming, and the Capitals have to be ready. All right, so coming up here after the break, I will talk to you about the core prospects for the Capitals. Who are they? I'll discuss straight ahead. Have you ever decided at the last minute to head to a ball game with friends or a family? Maybe it's game day and you suddenly realize you want to be in the stands. That's exactly where Game Time comes in. It's the easiest way to grab last minute tickets without the stress. With the money you save on tickets, you can splurge on food, drinks, merch, or even invite a bigger group to come with you. Game Time makes it possible. Game Time makes buying tickets fast and simple. Prices on the app actually drop the closer you get to first pitch. And they've got incredible last-minute deals, clear seat views, and a lowest price guarantee that takes the worry out of buying tickets. And that's what I love about it. Sometimes you're busy in your day and you're thinking, I'm going to go to the Nationals game tonight, and you forget about it. But fear not, as tickets actually get cheaper closer to first pitch. And the thing I absolutely love about it is the panoramic views. You know exactly what you're getting when you buy with Game Time. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and you would Locked On NHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDON NHL for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. All right, welcome back into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. You can find me over on Twitter. It's at DanCaps218. You can find the show on Twitter. It's at Locked On Caps. So in the second segment here, it's time to get to know who is a part of the next wave of Capitals prospects, the young guns. If you remember all those years ago, the young guns on the Capitals, Backstrom and Semin and Mike Green and all these guys. Well, the next wave of young guns, young stars for the Capitals is on deck waiting for their opportunity. We saw the introduction of some of those players last season. We saw Ryan Leonard, who joined the Capitals in the latter part of the season. We saw Ivan Miroshnichenko get a couple sips of coffee on the big team. And we also saw Andrew Cristall knock it out of the park in the preseason and destroy it with the Spokane Chiefs and the Kelowna Rockets. A lot of players that could definitely change the face of this franchise in the very near future. So let's dive into that in segment number 2. It's time to get hyped about some Capitals prospects. Nobody has more young wingers with legitimate upside than the Capitals. They have forwards. They have wingers in spades, as they say. And let's start with the big man himself, drafted 8th overall in 2023, Ryan Leonard. I think that he is going to be an absolute game changer for the Capitals. Again, I was hoping for more in the latter part of last season, but to be clear here, he jumped from the NCAA to the NHL to the playoffs. That was a lot of pressure, despite your accomplishments at the lower levels. It was a lot, but I expect him to take huge steps forward next season after he has some more time getting some NHL minutes on his hockey odometer. I think that he is going to be next level. And I believe that the kid is ready. He scored his first NHL goal the same night Ovi tied Gretzky. That is crazy. And I think that, just being able to accomplish something like that on a game that had such significance is quite something. Talk about timing. Timing is everything, and he brings that edge every shift. He can score, he can hit, he can get under your skin. He carries some of the same attributes as number 43, Tom Wilson. Advanced metrics show that he could even be better than Tom Wilson. But talking about accomplishments, he was MVP of the 2025 World Juniors. He's won gold twice with Team USA. That isn't just a prospect. That is a cornerstone of your franchise. And the Capitals need that. If Alex Ovechkin is sailing off into the sunset at the end of this season, we know that Tom Wilson is going to be your next captain, but he can't do it alone. He needs pillars. And if there's someone that's cut from somewhat of the same cloth as Tom Wilson, it's Ryan Leonard. So 2 big pillars on this team. Can you think about that? This team is going to even be better, I think, in years to come. So circle him. Where's he going to slot in? Where did we see him in his abbreviated snippet with the Capitals last season? Third line, right wing. But, everything's subject to change, right? That we saw Protas and we saw Wilson ahead of him, that if he really pops off the page, I think sky's the limit for Ryan Leonard. He could be the next great thing on the Capitals. And then let's shift over to the other one that has everyone drinking the Capitals Kool-Aid, Andrew Cristall. A guy that should have gotten earlier in the draft, but based on his skating and based on his size, was down a little bit in the draft. But Ross Mahoney and his crew, they were able to see what kind of player he is. He had those video game type numbers in the WHL. The question has always been skating. And what has he done to address that? Well, he's hired private coaches to help with the situation. He's bulked up in the weight room, eating those lean proteins and pushing aside the junk food, doing the things that he can fix in his career and making them better. Skating, check. He's bulked up. He can't work on getting any taller, but I think that he's checked the boxes that he needs to check off. And take a look at the back of his hockey card, playing with Spokane. Absolutely amazing. He's a power play weapon waiting to happen, in my opinion. That I think very realistic possibility that we could see Andrew Cristall on the big team next season. Of course, the good news, based on his age, that if for some reason he's not quite where Spencer Carberry or Chris Patrick or the decision makers involved, if he's not quite where, he can still marinate a bit in Hershey and just help take that Bears team to the next level. Huge. All right, let's talk next about another player that is quite exciting. A huge dude, and his brother plays on the Capitals. Get to know him, Ilya Protas. Not Alexei Protas, but Ilya Protas, the younger brother. And to think that he's just riding on his older brother's coattails would be selling him short. They have a lot of things in common. 6'5", huge frame. Has some of those prototypical Capital attributes, but absolutely torched it in Windsor. 50 goals and 124 points. Wow. Next level. Now, I expect him to play in Hershey, of course. Some people, if you ask Alexei, they say don't sell him short. There's a chance he'll be a Capital next season. But that's where he's penciled in, is to play in Hershey. Everything is subject to change. And if you want to draw lines to his brother, Alexei Protas, when was given his opportunity in camp a handful of years ago or so ago, he made the most of his opportunities, and the Capitals said, we can't send him down. He's too good to go right now. So, do you sense where I'm going here? I'm talking Leonard, Cristall, Protas. There's a lot to get excited about. The next player is probably a little bit more familiar to Capitals fans, and that is Ivan Miroshnichenko, or as I've dubbed him in the past, maybe a little bit over the top, but Alex Ovechkin 2.0. Now, another player that I think would have gotten higher in the draft if it was not based on his health. However, Ivan did not let that hold him back. He was the guy that when Ross Mahoney and his guys went to visit him, he was so skinny that the jeans were just hanging off his hips because of his treatment for lymphoma. But he found, it went into remission. He bulked up. He hit terminated that KHL contract, came over to the Capitals. Again, a couple sips with the Capitals. Pretty good, but absolutely took it to the next level in Hershey. Big picture, I think that he was still just getting acclimated to the North American game. It's a bit different than it is over in Russia, but the proof's in the pudding. 23 goals, 42 points in Hershey. That's a step forward. The thing about Ivan, as it's always been, is sustainability. And I'm going to go ahead and say that for Leonard, but it's hard to say because we haven't had a big enough peek at him on the big stage. Same goes for Andrew Cristall, but we know for certain that Ivan Miroshnichenko has been a bit hot and cold. And like I say, flashes. Some nights he looks NHL ready, other nights he fades. We need to see more sustainability. That has been the book on a lot of Capitals prospects in the past. Hendrik Slop here, Connor McMichael, those same things were said about those players as well. But the highs, they're really high. So I would also pencil him in maybe on this team. The problem, however, is there's not a lot of open holes in the roster, unless, we're going to talk about extras, extra skaters, those kind of things, because they added Justin Sordiff. And it's just going to be interesting to see how many of those players will actually make the big team and which players will start their season in Hershey or get reassigned to Hershey at some point. But in a league of what have you done for me lately and what have the Capitals done lately, Lyndon Lakovic, big, skilled, 2025 first rounder, kind of the same thing as the Protas brothers, not intrinsically tough guys, even though if they could add a bit of snarl to their game, that would even make them more of a multi-dimensional player. I think that Lyndon Lakovic is a ways out, of course, a young guy, but he's got the skills and his skill set. Moose Jaw, captain of the team, a lot to like there. I think that they, maybe not a player that many people picked, but when you take a look at his advanced metrics and just kind of what player he is, next level. Next, Milton Gastreen, two-way center, wins, draws, reliable. Check. I like it. And the player I get asked about more than a lot of other prospects, interestingly enough, is Tarek Parasak. I did an episode, a few weeks, maybe a month ago about him. I still think that he has some more room for growth. WHL score with great vision. I think that there, like I said, is room for growth. That's a mix of size, skill, and hockey IQ. Again, some of those players are going to be ready for prime time sooner than others, and some we're going to have to wait. But here's the key. The Caps don't need every single guy to hit. They just need 2 or 3. That's enough to keep the train moving. And we'll see where they develop when it comes to Parasak, when it comes to Gastreen, these kind of guys. I have hope in them in their game that it's going to develop even more. But we don't know, right? That there was a lot of hope for a lot of different Capitals that we thought were going to be next level. I'm talking Alexiev, Hendrik Slop here, these kind of guys. We hope that they can find their way, but I think the Capitals have enough prospect depth that they don't need to fret too much if they're not all hits, shall we say. All right, so coming up here after the break, we'll talk about defense and the goaltending pipeline straight ahead. August 26th is officially FanDuel Futures Day, a brand new holiday for football fans who live for bold predictions and preseason hunches. For just 24 hours, FanDuel is giving you deals on NFL season predictions. So whether you're calling your MVP, eyeing a long shot division winner, or ready to crown your Super Bowl champ before week 1 even kicks off, this is your moment. So if you are a fan of the Commanders, if you're a fan of the Ravens, who is your MVP? You can crown your champion in August or parlay your division winner dark horses. Listen, the football season is here. There is a lot to be excited about. I get it. So visit the FanDuel app today and start planning your future bets now, because Futures Day is one day and one day only. FanDuel, play your game. All right, welcome back into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. The best way that you can help grow the show is to subscribe to Locked On Capitals on YouTube and comment anything down below. So in the final segment of today's show, we're talking about defense and goaltending pipeline. There is one name that just has flashing lights around him. He is going to change the Capitals' blue line in a way that we have not seen for years. This is a name that you should be familiar with for a lot of reasons. Well, his brother is an NHL player, and I talk a fair bit about him on this episode as well, and that is Cole Hutson. Because it's not just the forwards. The defense group has some names too, and Cole Hutson, circle him, underline him, highlighter, boldface. You know, he is going to be next level. And he led the World Juniors in scoring as a defenseman. That's insane. Generally, you would think of a forward with that kind of scoring. But he's got the swagger and he's got the confidence, but he also understands himself enough to say, I'm not ready yet. And that was one of the things that Ross Mahoney said is these young players are more mature and they're more aware than they've ever been before, because oftentimes young players get some grief that they're not as tough as we were back in the day and this and that and the other thing. But the players nowadays are more self-aware. They're in better shape, and they can create expectations for themselves better than I think we've ever seen. They can assess their talent better. And I think that is development. I think that when there's young players, they start in the development phase way early, when it's nutrition, getting them ready to go, but also how to conduct yourself if you get lucky enough to get drafted or, play on an NHL team. But that is what he's going to do. He's going back to BU for another year. You could draw lines to Ryan Leonard, who picked a similar path, except with Boston College, that, hey, these are young guys. Let them live their young life. And if he wants to try to reach for greatness at BU and maybe on the international stage, let him do it. But when he's ready, he is going to be a fan favorite. Book it. And, again, John Carlson, he's not going to play forever. It's going to be his final year under contract. Will he sign an extension? Will the Capitals trade him? The winds blow on John Carlson. We don't know. And he's not the only one. TVR as well. And, when there's a guy like Cole Hutson in your pipeline, you're going to make room for him. So regardless of who potentially stands in his way of making the big team, when he's ready to go, and Chris Patrick has alluded to it as well, that the door's open. Whenever you're ready to go pro and take it to the next level, let's go. And that is my belief on it as well. Next, a name that should be quite familiar to many Capitals fans and has had sips of coffee on the big team is Vincent Iorio. Big, physical, 6'3". He played last year in Hershey. Summarize him: not flashy, not high scoring, but dependable. Another player somewhat in the same vein or the same breath as Alex Ovechkin, that's going to be his year next year. That at some point, I would like to see Vinny on the big team. And it's just making the most of your opportunities. You think of his most recent opportunity with the Capitals, he got injured, so that's not really on him. But he looks like a bottom pair shutdown guy who can eat minutes. A lot to like there. Another player that I spoke about somewhat recently is Ryan Chesley. Same mold, came out of Minnesota, had his best offensive season last year. The Capitals had to move some things around, including trading Vitek Vanacek to get that done. But as it turns out, the right move to make. Then impressed in Hershey with his physicality. Another year or two-ish, maybe sooner, depends on what kind of season he has, and he'll be NHL depth. Penciled in, right? The players hold their destiny. These are extremely early takes here. And then you got guys like Cam Allen, Leon Mugli, and Aaron Dahlqvist. Some of those will be flashier players. Some of those players have higher trajectories than others. It's just going to, again, how are they going to play next season? And then those will be adjusted. I take a look at the numbers. I see what kind of numbers they put up the year before, those kind of things. And you can kind of start to track things. Of course, that is all put in the blender, like we saw from some of the Capitals players last season, McMichael, Protas, these kind of guys, that it's too early to say. So now let's shift to the crease. And I love talking goaltending. As we know that Hunter Shepard is on to his next one. It was just never his time in Washington. It just wasn't. I was kind of hoping at points that it was, but then there was points that, I remember him going on the waiver wire. No one scooped him up. That I think that it was the end of the road with the Capitals. Whether that was his own doing or, he or the team just thought they had better options internally, that is the case. So who do we know is going to be starting ostensibly with Hershey is Clay Stevenson, prototypical Capital or goalie rather, big, moves in the crease well, but we've heard that. It's a bit more of a logjam now that LT signed a long-term deal and Charlie Lindgren signed, a midterm deal as well. So 3 years is what Charlie signed there. So I would say that unless the Capitals trade someone or there is a significant injury, that it's a bit of a logjam. But it is his time, Clay Stevenson's time to shine in Hershey. But let's fan out here a little bit more because he's not the only one. I'm talking more about younger prospects in this segment. We know about Clay Stevenson and some of the others, but let's talk about prospects more specifically. Nick Kempf, Antoine Keller, and Chase Clark. They've got the bodies. Maybe one pops, maybe one develops late. But the one thing I'm going to say is I don't think that there is a Braden Holtby amongst them. Again, I don't know. There's some raw talent there that could surprise me, but there's talent there. But again, is there the next Holtby type player? Not necessarily the case. But like I say, maybe one pops, maybe one develops late. That's just the nature of being a netminder. The key is they're giving themselves chances, and they're going to get chances at various levels. Some of these goalies are going to play in Hershey. Some are going to play for Carolina with the Stingrays. Some will be playing. They got options in junior levels as well. It just depends here. But it's exciting. The young defense, the Capitals pipeline, that I think big picture, the future is bright. The brightest area, of course, in my estimation, is the forward group. Defense isn't too shabby, but could also, they could draft some defensemen, I guess is what I'm going to say, in the upcoming drafts to help with that situation. That I think that they're pretty jam-packed in the forwards department. And then net minding. The thing of it is there is a lot of netminders within the Capitals organization. Who is the next? I'm going to say Braden Holtby, as he's the greatest netminder in somewhat recent history that comes to mind. Those are the things that the Capitals need to address, because the one thing the Capitals have done well for years is having their eyes set to the future. Same goes for here. The Capitals are good. The prospects are great, but let's even bulk up the defense and the net minding to get next level talent. All right, I want to thank you once again for joining me on this edition of Locked On Capitals, your only daily podcast covering the Capitals. And I want to thank all of you that listen on the audio side and watch this on YouTube. You are what makes this show successful. When you're done here, head on over to Locked On NHL, as they have you covered 5 days a week, available wherever you find your podcasts and on YouTube. All right, once again, I want to thank you for joining me on this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It is your team every day. My name is Dan Holme, and I'll talk to you again next time.